Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Rocco, again, and today we're going to be doing another album review, continuing on with the Genesis discography series. And I can't believe that we already made it to album number 11, the self-titled album Genesis from 1983. Now this album here, my opinion, I don't know, it's weird. It kind of shifted over the years. Some years, especially like earlier on, I used to consider this by far the best album post Duke. But now in recent years, it's kind of waned on me a bit. And now I consider it to be just slightly below, or at least tied with Invisible Touch, and a little bit below Abacab. And the main reason for that is because of the kind of inconsistent feeling this album has. Side one, I'm going to emphasize this many times throughout the review, is absolutely phenomenal. Some of the greatest pop rock of the 80s, bar none. And if the rest of the album was as great as side one, this would definitely reign supreme as the best post-Duke album. Now, it wouldn't be as good as Duke because I freaking love that album, but it will be up there. It will be damn close. It will be a tough call. But unfortunately, side two, not that it's bad or anything, it's actually pretty consistent, with the exception of one fucking song, which we're going to get into. But it's just kind of underwhelming at points. And I feel that with Genesis, I'd rather either have a really, really terrible song or a really, really excellent song, as crazy as that sounds. So although it's really consistent throughout side two, compared to side one, it just loses a lot of that magic. And it just feels a little bit more generic, a little bit more the band playing it safe. And I want to emphasize I do enjoy side two, but compared to the excellence of side one, it's just not there. So over the years, for that reason alone, I haven't been really going back to this album over and over again. Like I kind of listen to side one and then one particular track on side two, and then I kind of call it a day. I don't really sit through the entire thing. Whereas even albums like Abacab, I sit through the entire thing because that album is just so batshit crazy, and there's so many experimental twists and turns that I don't mind, listening to songs like Who Done It and Another Record, which are like the weaker ones on the album, because there's just so much variety on that thing. But yeah, so Genesis, it's still an excellent album, and I just want to get across that side one is just, I'm going to praise side one till the cows come home. It's just so great, and really shows Genesis kind of not going back to their older days, but abandoning some of the crazy experimentation on Abacab and bringing back elements, just elements of the past on those first couple tracks. So yeah, guys, that's my little intro. Without further ado, let's get into the history behind this album. Sorry for the abrupt change of scenery, guys. My usual area was being occupied like 5 minutes ago, but now we're back. And we're going to be talking a little bit about the history of this album. It's not as interesting, it's not as intriguing as the history behind a lot of the other Genesis albums. There were no lineup changes at this point. Really, at this point, the band's been really stable and really doing well for themselves, really getting a lot of new success. Sure, a lot of the old prog fans started jumping the bandwagon at this point with their more short, compact tunes. But, the new fans they gained definitely outweighed them by a factor of probably 1,000, to be honest. And Genesis were just doing well for themselves financially, commercially, and critically. Like, these albums were definitely well received by the public at the time. And, it was just a stable environment. So as I mentioned in the previous review from Abacab, they actually bought this farm in England, turned it into a studio where they would not only write, but also record the albums, produce them. They would do all that shit together. And really starting with Abacab, the writing of the album became a much more collaborative process. Or maybe I should say starting with Duke, but definitely on Abacab, it was more collaborative. Again, before that, especially on albums like Wind and Wuthering, and then there were three, and Trick of the Tail, it was very, very much each of the members of the band bringing in their own preconceived songs that they had already composed, and the band would just work on them and add like little bits here and there. But now the band were really working together, and this was the first Genesis album where they had absolutely no pre-composed songs. Like, they came into the studio with a blank slate, just sat their asses down and wrote this album collaboratively, and they always thought that was the best way to write, and the best material of Genesis came out of that. Now, I neither agree nor disagree with that, because there's a lot of great solo compositions that I consider to be the best, some of the best Genesis music, but instrumentally at least, that's definitely where the magic was cooking, and Genesis was the first album where not one song was pre-written. So, you know what, that little known fact, that's the reason they actually called this album Genesis, because it was such a collaborative process that they wanted to self-title it just to get the message across that this was really like a 33% each between Tony Banks, Mike Rutherford, and Phil Collins' contribution. And yeah, so a lot of people think they were kind of retitling this because they were changing their sound. And if anything, you would think that the album Abacab would be that, because that's just a total 180 in their sound. This one here brings back some of those familiar elements, definitely more weight toward their poppier side, but brings in a lot of those old elements. So it's a misconception that they self-titled this album because they thought it was like their definitive album. It was just due to the collaborative process. And before I jump into like the making of this album, I should probably mention the tour for Abacab was pretty awesome. My dad actually went to see it back in the day, I think in 82, 83, and he said it was awesome. Phil Collins was on fire. And they also did a show called Six of the Best, which was basically a Genesis reunion concert. That's right, they got Peter Gabriel in there, they got Steve Hackett. Actually, Peter Gabriel recruited them because it was for his WOMAD World Music benefit, and they needed a lot of financial assistance, so, topping the bill with Genesis was a great move financially. So yeah, that must have been awesome. And there were rumors going around that the band was going to get back together, but no, it was just for financial reasons. They decided to headline the show, bringing that cash flow into Peter Gabriel's charity, I should say. He wasn't profiting from it. But yeah, I found that really cool. And also, they released their Three Sides live album from the Abacab tour, which is interesting because they brought back a lot of the old, and I mean fucking ancient songs. Like fucking Fountain of Salmacis was on that goddamn album, which is crazy. And for all those people that say Genesis abandoned prog, they did not. They changed with the times. They wanted to do new things to explore different creative outlets, but they didn't abandon prog, or else they wouldn't be playing the fucking Fountain of Salmacis in their live set. And up until 81, 82, they were still doing Supper's Ready live. So that theory, just throw it out. Just throw it out the window right now. The reason they went pop, or at least more pop inspired, were for just pure creative reasons. So some pretty cool things happening before the making of this album. They also went on tour to support that live album, which is funny. Usually you think like you go on tour, release a live album, then go back into the studio. But no, they went back on tour to kind of promote the Three Sides live album, which is pretty funny, I would say. I think Rush were thinking of doing that too back in the day. But anyway, now I'm rambling. So anyway, they recorded the album. It was just a very relaxed process. Tony Banks, he got a few new tricks up his sleeve with the sampling synthesizer. So you could bring in a lot of those different sounds and things. Sample a lot of different things on the synth, which is pretty cool, a very 80s thing. Bringing back a lot of those production values from Abacab, like the gated reverb with the drums, and a lot of drum machine as well, which is funny to think because, Phil Collins being one of the greatest drummers ever, you wouldn't think he'd lean too heavily on a drum machine, but they use it a lot, so awesome. So anyway, they recorded this album. It was a huge hit. Mama was a massive hit, and also That's All. I mean, you must have been living under a rock if you don't know the song That's All. Even if you don't even know who Genesis is, you've heard that fucking song. And it just, it did very well in the charts. It went to number 1 in the UK, number 9 in the Billboard charts, and I think it's a triple platinum at this point. Went double platinum by 87, probably because of Invisible Touch's just massive success, bringing in those sales from the early albums. But yeah, Genesis were definitely rising superstars, which is crazy to think because this is their 11th album, or 12th if you want to count from Genesis to Revelation. I never do, but just it's a weird success story for these guys coming in this late into their career. So some other things on this album, historically speaking, let me check it out. Yeah, you know what? Not much. Just the new synthesizer coming in, and a lot of the drum machine and gated reverb. Not really much new innovation on this one. It's funny because Tony Banks in the Genesis interviews, which I strongly recommend you watch, he does acknowledge that side 1 is a whole lot stronger than side 2, which is funny because he calls side 1 kind of like the main event, and side 2 is like these supporting character sketches. And I could definitely see that. It's just a nicer way of saying side 2 is just a bunch of filler. But again, I do enjoy side 2, just again, not as much as side 1. So anyway, guys, I think that's all I could say about the history behind this album. Just checking my notes to make sure. One other thing I should mention is that Steve Hackett, being the gentleman that he was, he really supported Genesis with this album, made a lot of great comments about the song Mama, and which was really nice of him, to be honest, because, he's considered more of the prog kind of guy. But yeah. So anyway, guys, now let's dive into my overall review of the album. Alright guys, so seeing as how I keep saying that side 1 is so much better than side 2, and I keep trying to make that differentiation, I should say that there are a lot of themes running throughout this album that are consistent between side 1 and side 2. It's just the execution of those themes and the quality that really differs between the two. Now, number 1, this is primarily a pop rock album. I mean, there are so many catchy melodies, so many catchy hooks, and this really just shows Genesis at their most streamlined, their most commercial, and especially compared to Abacab, probably their least experimental album. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Everyone loves a good pop song, and this album is absolutely filled to the brim with some of the catchiest melodies of the 80s. This was pop done right, and it's just amazing how a prog band like Genesis just basically acquired this new talent for writing pop tunes. Right around the Duke time, or I guess you could say, and then there were 3 with Follow You, Follow Me. They kind of discovered this hidden talent that they never knew they had, and they took advantage of it. So really, between side 1 and side 2, everything is really pop-oriented. Now here's the thing. Side 1, the flow between the tracks is just phenomenal, and there's one song on side 1, Home by the Sea, part 1 and part 2, which I always just call Home by the Sea. It's really just one 10-minute track, if you want to think about it that way, that brings back a lot of their prog elements of the past. So again, although it's poppy, like the chorus of Home by the Sea, the main melody of the track is just really accessible, and the music doesn't really wander off and do too many experimental things. Part 2 is basically this long instrumental jam, which is absolutely fantastic, and really accessible as well. I mean, it doesn't go off into any challenging things where you have to really listen to it multiple times to appreciate. It's just really immediate instrumental music. But again, with the long extended instrumental, that's definitely bringing back that prog. So side 1 has a lot of variation, not to mention the song Mama, which is really poppy and catchy, but totally experimental. Totally like something you would picture them doing on Abacab. They're creating this dark, moody, atmospheric track that doesn't really fit in with any of the other previous Genesis songs. So really, there's a lot of variation there. Plus, you got That's All, which is just a catchy melody. I mean, one of the catchiest Genesis songs of all time. And again, now and there, I feel like it would have fit better on side 2. So I guess you guys can see where I'm going with this one. But at least side 1 has some great variation between the tracks. You got that big instrumental bit, you got the experimentation of Mama, and you got the pop, straightforward, catchy melodies of That's All. So you got some great variation there. Now the thing is, on side 2, the pop songs, they're a little bit less catchy, you know, a little bit more generic. Like I feel like a lot of the bands at the time were doing things like this, and you know, just not as memorable. And you can't really, you know, songs like Silver Rainbow and things like that. Okay, sure, I've been listening to this album for like 10 years now, so it's ingrained in my memory. But it took me a while to even remember how that song went after like the first year of listening to this album. No joke. And there's a few generic ballads like Taking It All Too Hard, which is good. It's not like, again, there's no bad songs on side 2, but it doesn't have that Genesis magic. It doesn't have those quirky Genesis vibes that some of the songs on side 1 have. And that's really the main difference, at least on Abacab. Sure, the songs were tighter, more compact, but they were crazy, they were experimental. Again, that's a very jagged, very avant-garde, kind of a minimalistic album. But yet, they take that minimalistic approach and really morph it into something special with all the variety and all the different quirky elements that only Genesis can do. So as I mentioned in that review, it's prog, but in a different way. This one here, Genesis was really taking influence from a lot of their peers and just crafting straightforward pop songs, which are excellent. But, and again, I'm talking about side 2 here, but really nothing that screams original. So really, this is the first Genesis album where I don't really feel, again, I'm talking side 2 here, where I don't really feel that magic, where it's like, damn, that's just classic Genesis. You know, even though Abacab sounded totally different than everything before that, it had that reckless abandon, that, you know, that Genesis magic. This album here, it's kind of stripped off a bit on side 2, at least in my opinion. Now, there's a fantastic song on side 2 called It's Gonna Get Better, which I absolutely love. Probably like my 3rd favorite track on the entire album. But again, that song there isn't very original and creative. So that's the main thing. Now, another thing I want to mention is, I mentioned on the Abacab review, they took like a minimalist approach, like the beat, like if you listen to stuff like Keep It Dark, just these hypnotic, repetitive riffs. On this album here, they kind of go back to the past a bit because it's a little bit more fleshed out. The music's much more fleshed out. There's a lot more going on. And Tony Banks' keyboard style brought back a bit of that symphonic flair that he had in the past. Some like real orchestrated sounding moments. And I think Tony Banks had enough of that simplistic, minimalist approach on Abacab. So again, a little bit more in common with Duke. And I kind of feel like if this album actually came out after Duke and then Abacab came after that, I wouldn't question it. I mean, this album here just sounds like a natural progression from Duke, really delving into the tracks like Turn It On Again, Misunderstanding, a lot of the more simplistic tracks. Whereas Abacab was just a complete 180 in sound that you would think like that would be even later on in their career. So again, bringing back a lot of elements from the past. So although side 2 loses a bit of the magic and is a bit more generic, side 1 is just a perfect example of just some of the strongest Genesis pop moments, some experimentation there with Mama, and a lot of prog with the Second Home by the Sea section. Second Home by the Sea section. I'm sorry, I'm gonna keep that in. You know what? It's fucked up, but I'm gonna keep that in. But anyway, guys, another thing I want to mention is Phil Collins' vocals. Incredible on this album, just absolutely incredible. Starting with Duke, he really came into his own as a singer and really started emoting and putting a lot of passion into his vocals. And on this album here, it's no exception. I mean, his vocals are at the top of his game, especially on the song Mama. And Mike Rutherford on the guitar, he's as solid as always. Doesn't really go above and beyond like Steve Hackett, but at this point, that's like beating a dead horse. We're already like 4 albums into the Steve Hackett list period of Genesis, so can't complain about him. And again, I already mentioned Tony Banks' performance, going back to the more symphonic style of Duke and previously. But again, still like using a lot of those simplistic pop hooks and everything like that. So yeah, kind of a mishmash of different things on this album. Again, side 2, another thing I forgot to mention earlier on when I was kind of trashing side 2 is that it never really has those emotional climaxes that Genesis was known for. Even on Duke, I mean, even on Abacab, songs like Dodo Lurker had those big, powerful Genesis moments. And songs like Man on the Corner had some really powerful sections as well. This album here doesn't, again, side 2 doesn't really have those emotional moments. It kind of feels like a little bit more processed, a little bit less, and again, Phil Collins wasn't going through a divorce or anything at this point, so I guess that kind of had that kind of contributed to like the powerful moments on Duke and things like that. But again, on side 2 of this album, it just feels like, it's an easy listening. You just put it on in the background, enjoy, but nothing to really sit down and really dig deep into, which is what I love doing with music. So anyway, guys, I think that's all I could squeeze out for the review on this one. I know it's kind of short compared to my usual excessive rants and everything, but really, I just want to emphasize, if side 2 was as fantastic as side 1, this album would really reign supreme as the best post-Duke album, but unfortunately, that's just not how it goes. So anyway, now let's get into the track-by-track reviews, talk a bit about the specifics. Now listen to me, mama, 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 you're taking away my last chance. Don't take it away, can't you feel my heart? Opening up this album, we have my absolute favorite track on the album, and it's not even close. Actually, I just lied. Home by the Sea is a close second. But Mama, holy fuck, what a fantastic song. This song has always been one of my all-time favorite post-Duke Genesis songs, or actually post-Peter Gabriel Genesis songs in general. This song is just fantastic. And it seems like a lot of the progressive rock fans kind of slander this track, which is ironic because a lot of the progressive rock fans seem to like this album better than Abacab. But this song here is just so strange, and again, very experimental for Genesis. They're just definitely stepping outside of their comfort zone, and that's what I love about the songs on side 1. It was just Genesis kind of stepping outside of their comfort zone, like on what they were doing on Abacab. And this song here is just a dark, smoldering, atmospheric song that just gradually builds and builds and builds, and it's a 7-minute track, so, it was funny how this song was a hit single for the band. Tony Banks definitely didn't think they would pick this as the hit single. And opening up the album with this track was actually a ballsy move. But, it has stood the test of time, and it does have a really catchy melody to it. But it's such a dark and heavy atmospheric song. Nothing like any other Genesis song I've ever heard. And it's absolutely iconic for that reason. So I think that's the main reason why I like it, just because it has so much variety to it. And really nothing else they did sounded anything like this. Phil Collins took a lot of influence from different sources for this song. For the verses, funny enough, apparently he took inspiration from John Lennon's Beep Bop Balula, which must have been a cover, because I know John Lennon didn't write that song. But I haven't heard that track yet, but that's interesting. And for the famous laugh on the song, the ha ha ha, Phil Collins, this is hilarious. He actually got that from a rap song by the early rap band Grandmaster Flash. Now you got to remember, this is 1983 we're talking about here, so a very early rap band, and that's hilarious. You know, Phil Collins listening to rap at the time, that must have been one hell of a sight to see. But yeah, he took that into the song, and that laugh, which we'll talk about in more detail soon, really gives the song this weird, quirky, ominous vibe that I love about it. The song wouldn't have been the same without it. It kind of just makes the song for me. But yeah, this track here musically, it opens up with this really ominous synth line from Tony Banks. Really not the way you want to start off your album. It was just really brave of them to start the album with this. And it just has this gated reverb drumming. Actually, I should mention the drum machine that starts off the track. That actually comes in before the synth. And it's a gated reverb drum machine that just drones throughout the entire song, giving it that hypnotic feel. And giving it this really mechanical kind of sound to it. And especially with Tony Banks's kind of that rapid pulsating synth riff or line that he does throughout the song. It sounds like Morse code, and it continues throughout the whole song. But then he has this eerie, more symphonic sounds over that, which is, again, really dark and really ominous. A very heavy song for Genesis. Then when Phil comes in, the whole thing really starts to build up. And really, Phil Collins, for me, is definitely the star of the show. His vocals get so intense, and it's a gradual, smoldering build. It starts off pretty quiet, pretty, I don't want to say serene, but pretty laid back. But as the song progresses, his vocals just get so intense. And by the end, it's so climactic. I mean, he's screaming, he's doing all kinds of things. And it's hard to believe that the same guy who's singing on Trick of the Tail, you know, things like Entangled, Man, Moon, just showing the softer side of his voice, was able to progress into this fantastic singer in his own right. And I always said that this is probably the greatest Phil Collins vocal performance. I can't think of a better one. Okay, there's a few songs on Duke that might rival it, but he's just so powerful on this track. The guitar playing is very minimalistic as well, and there's a funny kind of synth line that comes in later in the song, and it's just so simple for Tony Banks. I know I mentioned earlier that this album doesn't take a minimalist approach, but that keyboard riff or synth solo, whatever you want to call it, definitely takes a minimalist approach. And it just leaves you wondering, like, fuck, this is the same guy that did the intro of Firth the Fifth and The Lamb and all those, you know, really complex things. But it works in the context of this song. So really cool. And again, the laugh in this track, the Phil Collins, ha ha ha, that just gives it this evil kind of characteristic that I absolutely love. And, you know, I'm not going to lie, guys, I'm a huge fucking Genesis fan. I'm a diehard fan. And I sing a lot of Genesis songs. And nothing pisses my family off more than when I sing Mama, because I go all out with that fucking laugh. I'm not going to duplicate it in this video. I think I already did it a few times. But I really do it. I do like the little extended oh at the end of it too. And it just pisses my family off, but I don't give a fuck. I love the song that much. And man, I could talk about this song all day. It's just absolutely amazing. Some symphonic moments as well, especially when Phil Collins sings, "Can you see me? Yeah, Mama." Like the organ in the background, bringing that classic symphonic vibe back in. So yeah, smoldering, epic song. Later on, the guitar kicks in to a fuller extent. Just honestly a masterpiece. Nothing else sounded like this. And I'm going to give this a 9.5 out of 10. I love it that much. Or maybe a 9. Some days I feel a 9. Some days I feel a 9.5. But really interesting song in Genesis' discography. It's always the same, it's just a shame, that's all. Truth is I love you more than I wanted to. There's no point in trying to pretend. So the next song on the album, That's All. This has got to be one of Genesis' greatest hits. I mean, I've heard this, I've known about this song as long as I could fucking remember. I mean, going back to like when I was like 3-4 years old, I actually vividly remember hearing this track. And it's easy to see why. I mean, this is one of the most accessible Genesis songs of all time. Something that would have fit a little bit better on side 2, keeping with the theme of the tracks there. Doesn't really have that Genesis magic, anything to really differentiate it from the pack of great pop songs, but really don't overthink it. It's just a fantastic pop song. The melody is awesome, memorable, catchy, and it's crazy how I haven't gotten sick of this song yet. Now, I don't love it as much as the earlier pop Genesis songs like No Reply at All, Misunderstanding, Turn It On Again, and Follow You, Follow Me. This one here I'd consider more of like a tier 2 pop song, but it's just so catchy and really Beatles inspired. The band really took inspiration from the late great Beatles, and yeah, and that's really what it is. So really, this song doesn't really have much in common with the other Genesis songs that came out before this. Again, Tony Banks's piano, it's basically based on Tony Banks's piano riff that opens the track that kind of continues throughout the whole thing. And this isn't your typical Tony Banks piano riff. Again, it's very simplistic, very upbeat, very melodic, and he even has an organ solo later on in the song, which is just really catchy, really, again, euphoric and energetic, but not your typical symphonic Tony Banks thing. But again, it suits the song. And the thing I love about this track is I love the bridge. The bridge is beautiful and melancholic, whereas the rest of the song is pretty upbeat and catchy. It's probably the highlight of the whole song for me. Later on in the song, the guitar kicks in. It's a little bit more prominent, whereas during the meat and potatoes of the track, the majority of it, the guitar kind of just chills in the background. And Phil Collins' drumming, again, a lot of drum machine on this track, and the drumming itself isn't very complex. So Phil Collins was definitely chilling on this song. Not much in terms of virtuosic drum moments, but again, you gotta take it for what it is. You can't overanalyze a song like this. It's just meant to be enjoyed. It's kind of like an easy listening pop tune. And in that regard, it succeeds. And it's a great foil to Mama, because again, this is a very joyous, upbeat kind of track, other than the bridge. And Mama was just that dark, smoldering, atmospheric tune. So really good foil to that. And I really like that about side one. It has those foils, those polar opposites being juxtaposed together, which is really cool. So you know what? I would give that song an 8 out of 10. You know, at one point, I would have probably given it an 8.5, but you know, just over the years, don't really go back to this one that much. So, but yeah, it's still a fantastic pop tune.
Let us relive our lives in what we tell you. Sit down, sit down, sit down. 'Cause you won't get away, no, with us. You will stay for the rest of your days. Sit down.
All right, moving on, guys, with the album, and then we get track number 3, Home by the Sea. Now, this one here, I was really tempted to just review this as one track, adding in second Home by the Sea as well, but the more and more I thought about it, there are a lot of differences between this and that song, so I do want to kind of differentiate them, and I really think that because they both have these different moods, different atmospheres, I really think that's why Genesis split them up. Either that, or they were worried that having a 10-minute song on the album would be kind of unmarketable at this point, or the fact that, I don't know, they seem to have this sticking problem with people comparing their tracks to Supper's Ready, and I believe they thought that if they made it a 10-minute track, and kept it on the album like that people would be comparing it to their previous stuff, which they didn't want for some stupid reason. But anyway, they end up splitting the song up into 2 parts, Home by the Sea and second Home by the Sea. So let's talk about Home by the Sea first. This track here, one of my absolute favorites on the album. Definitely this and second Home by the Sea are really the only songs that stand up to Mama for me. Again, I think most fans would consider these tracks to be the best on the album, but I don't know, there's just something about Mama that I just love, that has that haunting atmosphere that sucks you in, which is ironic because this song is about ghosts of all things, and you would think that this song would be a little bit more haunting, but no, it's much more upbeat than Mama. But yeah. So the first thing I want to mention about this track is the subject matter. So it has a really cool storyline. Basically, these burglars breaking into this house down by the sea, and being enveloped with these stories being told by the ghosts that live in the house, and they're basically trapping these guys in the house. And I don't know if they get possessed or whatever, but basically these ghosts are kind of coming alive, trying to relive their lives through the stories they tell and the things they do to these guys. So it's kind of up to interpretation, but it's really cool. And I like how Genesis is bringing back that whimsical, kind of fantastical subject matter that they kind of really abandoned starting with the Duke album onward, where it got a little bit more mature, a little bit more personal. This track here just goes back to that whimsical, fantastical kind of sound, which I really like. So yeah, that's one element that it has in common with the past. And I did mention that this song has a lot in common with a lot of the the Genesis moments that came earlier, and I think that really comes with Tony Banks's keyboard playing. It's a lot more symphonic, a lot more orchestral sounding on this song, especially compared to stuff he was doing on Abacab, which was really sharp, acerbic, and again, minimalist. Here you get like a lot of these like woodwind sounding keyboard sections and a lot of like these haunting, laid back, almost beautiful symphonic kind of lines on the keyboard, which is really awesome. It just takes you back to the earlier Genesis years. But then again, it combines it with the tight, short, succinct, and absolutely catchy melodies and hooks of this album. I mean, this song here doesn't have one, but two of the catchiest Genesis choruses of all time, and one of the best Genesis verses of all time as well. And Phil Collins' vocal delivery, just totally steals the show. Just like Mama, he's giving it his all. And I mean, some points of this track get so climactic, especially the second chorus where he sings, "As we relive our lives in what we tell you." He just puts so much into it, so much passion. And it has that Genesis magic. It has that big Genesis moment at the end of the song where everything just climaxes and just puts goosebumps on the back of your neck. So really, this song here is what I think the rest of the album's lacking. Those big, powerful, emotional Genesis moments that, after Home by the Sea, we don't really get those moments anymore on the album. And Mama had it as well. And really, it's just Phil Collins' vocals at the absolute zenith of his vocal capabilities. I mean, this guy's just can't say enough about his vocals. And again, I mentioned the verses are pretty upbeat, pretty catchy, don't really fit in with the whole ghost theme of the track, but in the middle, it does wind down a bit, and Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford are doing these haunting things with the guitar and keyboards, respectively. And it's a nice little wind down section, but it never gets into like an experimental or lengthy instrumental. So I wouldn't really call this a prog rock song, but it does have a lot of elements from their prog past, namely with the subject matter and Tony Banks' more symphonic style of keyboard playing. So yeah, really can't say enough about Home by the Sea. I would easily give this one a 9 out of 10. Now, without further ado, let's segue into second Home by the Sea. Right, so segueing right into second Home by the Sea, just like part one does. I mean, it really is a seamless transition at the end of part one where the whole song kind of winds down. But then when second Home by the Sea comes in, we're greeted with this absolutely thumping, pounding rhythm on the drum machine that comes in. And it kind of jolts you, kind of startles you and wakes you up. But again, it is a very seamless transition, which is kind of funny. But it kind of catches you off guard. And really what this song was Phil Collins laying down this beat on the drum machine, and the band were literally just jamming over it. And it really does sound like a jam. I mean, there's a lot of twists and turns going on in this track. And what they did was they just glued the best parts together. And it's a really good song. The track I would definitely compare this to is Duke's Travels from the Duke album, because the majority of it is an instrumental, but then Phil Collins does come back at the end reprising sections of Home by the Sea, particularly the second chorus that I love so much. But just like on Duke's Travels, where he reprises guide vocals at the end of that long instrumental section. So yeah, I always find that really powerful when prog bands do these reprises after long instrumental sections. So I love that element of prog, and this song really does it. And I think Genesis were literally the masters of doing that. I mean, look back to songs like Supper's Ready, when the As Sure as Eggs is Eggs section comes in, reprising the intro of the song. There's just something about that gives it so much weight, so much power, and just really makes you realize the whole cohesive totality of the track, which is really, really awesome, really profound. And I know I'm really overanalyzing this track, but I love it that much. It really goes back to those earlier Genesis moments, at least in theory and at least in feel. But in sound, there's a lot of differences. The guitar lines here are really sharp, really rocking at some points. And again, with that drum machine in the background, those two elements there definitely bringing back that from Abacab, from the Abacab years. But again, Tony Banks' melodic synth playing over that, which again sounds so symphonic, and it really gets climactic and triumphant at points. And really motivational too. I mean, there's this one section where the synth just builds up with the that part there just motivates me. I don't know what it is about it, but again, it's just unexpected when it comes in, and again, Tony Banks' symphonic synth playing, clashing with the sharp guitar riffs going throughout the entire track. Really awesome contrast there. And then it goes into this nice, haunting middle section. And before you know it, Mike Rutherford actually comes in with some beautiful climactic guitar playing, some really, really nice notes. And then he starts reprising the main verse of the track on the guitar. And that's when the goosebump moment happens, when that reprise kicks in and it takes you back to Home by the Sea, part 1, I'm going to call it. And then Phil Collins comes in and he's singing the main verse of that track, but in a much slower, more melancholic way. And then kicking into the second chorus of Home by the Sea, but again in a much slower and laid back kind of way. It's beautiful. It's a big Genesis moment, and that's what I love about Home by the Sea and Second Home by the Sea. It has those classic Genesis elements, but presented in a new way, making it so fresh and exciting. So Second Home by the Sea, I would give it a 9 to a 9.5 out of 10. It's a wonderful instrumental, wonderful song, and yeah, one of the big highlights. So yeah, I wanted to kind of delve into these first 4 tracks a little bit more. The rest of the review is going to be sped up because, again, a lot of the songs coming up aren't very, I don't know, like they're good, but they don't really turn me on like these tracks. So let's flip the album over to side 2. Alright guys, flipping over the album, we get Illegal Alien. And you know me guys, I hate talking shit about Genesis, but it must be done every now and again. I mean, they're not perfect, no band is perfect, and Illegal Alien is just a shit stain on their entire career. Now I know what you're thinking, it's just an upbeat, catchy, funny kind of track, but honestly guys, it wears thin. And again, this is coming from a long-time Genesis fan. Trust me, after like the first 2 listens, any charm this song would have had on the first listen is gone. I mean, it's just one of the most annoying, irritating Genesis songs, and it has no business at all being 5 minutes in length. I mean, this should have been like a 2-minute track at the most. And honestly, it's just so irritating. Tony Banks is just cheesy, Caribbean-sounding synthesizer playing in the weird sound effects, and Phil Collins' vocals imitating a Mexican accent or a Spanish accent. Honestly, like, they actually gave Genesis shit. They thought it was like a little bit racist at the time, but I don't think that at all. I mean, this was definitely just like a tongue-in-cheek kind of track. But yeah, I can definitely see how it would have been offensive at the time. And the thing I hate about this song is that the verses are so freaking catchy. And I know it sounds like, I'm being a hypocrite because I'm criticizing this track, but catchy in a bad kind of way. Like, you don't want it stuck in your head. But when it does get stuck in your head, it's like, fuck, I can't get it out now. And I have a story to share with you guys. I'll never forget this. During one of the hardest exams of my life that I ever had back in school, I had listened to this album shortly before the exam, and of all the tracks to be stuck in my head, it was fucking Illegal Alien. The entire 3-hour exam, I had this annoying-ass bullshit song just playing throughout my mind, and I hated my life on that day. So anyway, guys, Illegal Alien, definitely one of the worst Genesis songs of all time. And side 2's off to a shitty start. But luckily, this is by far the worst song on side 2. So if you can get past this one, and again, if you find the humor in it funny and everything, good for you. But it wore off literally after the second listen. So I'm honestly going to give Illegal Alien like a 5 out of 10. Because again, the chorus is kind of catchy. And, it does have some charm on the first or second listen. But then after that, it just nah.
Why can't you see what's going on? I know you never admit you would ever be to blame. Everything's a game to you.
So the next track on the album, thankfully a lot better than Illegal Alien. We got Taking It All Too Hard. Kind of like the love song on the album, more of the ballad, and it's a good song. I mean, don't get me wrong, I enjoy listening to it, but it definitely has more of a processed, kind of mass-produced kind of feel compared to the earlier Genesis ballads, and especially, it's kind of lacking in passion, to be honest. I mean, Phil Collins is kind of monotone throughout the entire track. I like his velvety, smooth vocals during the more melancholic, laid-back sections. That section there is actually pretty good, but the rest of the track, the main hook, the main melody, especially with the backing vocals, with that R&B and soul kind of feel, kind of takes away a little bit of the passion, the emotion to the track, and gives it this more mass-produced kind of, generic kind of feel. I mean, look at songs like, Please Don't Ask. I mean, that song on Duke there was just a tearjerker. It was a love ballad, but it was just so emotional and so powerful. This song here, you don't really get that moment. It's just an easy listening kind of track. Really, the instrumentals don't really stand out. And again, other than that smoky, midnight kind of velvety section, the more melancholic section of the track, that's the best way I can describe it. This song really doesn't have much to offer, but it is enjoyable, it is good, and it's more of a pop ballad in that sense. I don't think it's really meant to tug at your heartstrings. It's just a ballad, a love song, just for the sake of writing a love song, I would say. So yeah, just an easy listening track. I would give this one a strong 7.5 out of 10, but again, it doesn't have that emotional resonance that a lot of their other ballads had.
Someone put the word on you. I hope my aim is true. 'Cause I got a name and I got a number. I got a line on you.
Next track, we got Just Another Job to Do. This one here, I quite like this song. It has this drive to it. It's got this upbeat R&B funky rhythm going throughout the entire track. It's pretty enjoyable. Again, nothing really out of the ordinary, nothing really special that you want to keep coming back to over and over again. But when I hear Just Another Job to Do, I always have a good time. It's always an enjoyable track for me. And I love the funkiness to it. And I love how Tony Banks isn't really going over the top with the synth. Also, Phil Collins' vocals have a nice drive to it in the beginning during the verses. And there's even a nice laid-back section where he puts a little bit of passion, a little bit of that tender quality to his voice into it. So yeah, pretty cool track. Pretty lengthy as well, about 5 minutes. Normally a song like this, probably I would say that the optimal length would be like 3.5 to 4 minutes. But, it's an enjoyable 5-minute listen. Pretty good song. Kind of like the No Reply at All of the album because it has a lot of this jazzy kind of horn samples going on the keyboard. And again, Tony Banks is bringing in that sampling on a synthesizer, so they didn't really have to hire the earth, air, wind, and fire, whatever the fuck that band called horn section. He had it built into his synth. So yeah, nice funky track. I'd give this one maybe an 8 out of 10. Yeah, I think that's fair.
If you're walking home beside her, and you know what time it is, and if you avoid the puddles in your way.
Alright guys, so let's talk a little bit about the next track, Silver Rainbow. This song here, it's a bizarre Genesis song. I mean, it's strange because a lot of the more progressive leaning fans seem to really like this track, but I really don't see anything progressive about it. And really, honestly, this track was kind of a missed opportunity for me. I mean, there's some sections of the song that I absolutely love, but other sections that just, the song just loses me. And I mean, it's such an unbalanced kind of track that, the great sections are kind of outweighed by the mediocre sections. Overall, it's an enjoyable listen. Again, it's 5 minutes, so maybe a little bit too long for the amount of material it contains. Maybe it could have been 4 minutes, 3.5 minutes at the longest. But again, it's not horrible. I just want to elaborate a bit on what I'm talking about when I say the song is kind of imbalanced. So it starts off really cool, actually, really atmospheric. Phil Collins' vocals are really tender and really dreamlike. It creates this dreamlike atmosphere. And coming after a track like Just Another Job to Do and like a mass-produced kind of pop ballad, kind of like throwing it all away, it was a nice change. And I was like, damn, this is a pretty good way to start the track. And then before you know it, the song gets into this heavy driving rhythm that, I normally don't headbang to Genesis songs. There's a few exceptions. The musical box, sections of Fountain of Salmacis, The Knife, things like that. But this section here has this really groovy, thumping, and again, heavy bass, synth, and drum line. I think it's drum machine as well. I could be wrong. Actually, no, it isn't drum machine. I believe it's actually Phil, just showing off the heavier side of his drumming. And his vocals come in, and it's an awesome kind of groove. But then before you know it, we get into the chorus, and it just totally kills the vibe. It totally kills the atmosphere. So cheesy, especially with the backing vocals. And Tony Banks is overly, I don't know, I was going to say overly joyous, but the synth doesn't really sound joyous. I wouldn't use that word. But the really cheesy sounding synth from Tony Banks. Love the guy, but I got to criticize his sound on this chorus. It just gives it this weird, again, it is symphonic in nature, but rather than adding to the epicness, it just makes it sound so cheesy. And it just kills the heavy atmosphere this song was really building up to. So yeah, really not a fan with the chorus, especially with the backing vocals. Ugh, just I actually hate the chorus of this song. But before you know, we get into the nice, heavy driving rhythm again, and it's pretty cool. But then again, back into the chorus, and the song kind of fades out with that chorus. There's some cool bass lines in there. Uh, I just really noticed recently when re-listening to the track, but overall, Silver Rainbow, not one of my favorites. Kind of a forgettable song. Great verses, but the chorus is definitely lackluster. So I would probably give this track at most maybe an 8 out of 10, but today I'm feeling a 7.5.
It's gonna get better. We gotta start now. 'Cause I know everybody can feel it. And I know everybody will see it. 'Cause it shows, and it shows I'm not dreaming.
Closing out the album, we get one of my absolute favorites, and this song here, honestly, without hesitation, is a fantastic Genesis song. It's gonna get better. And I feel that nobody really talks about this track, and you know what, I usually don't like using the word underrated because it's so subjective, but I really feel like this song just kind of gets overlooked in Genesis's discography, and I really think that It's Gonna Get Better is one of the more unique kind of ballads that Genesis wrote. It's just fantastic, everything about it. And I find that it's a progressive song as well. It goes through a lot of different changes, really no crazy instrumental sections, but it has that Genesis magic that a lot of the tracks on side one kind of had. And I think if you swapped out That's All with this song, side one would really be one of the greatest sides in Genesis history. Okay, maybe not compared to the Peter Gabriel era, but you know what I'm talking about. One of the best later era Genesis album sides. And it is. It actually is. Even with That's All instead of this track. But anyway, there's no point in talking about rewriting history. We got to take the album for what it is. And I like how the album closes on a really unique song. And one of the best. So great way to close out the album. So many highlights on this track. First of all, I just want to talk about the intro. The intro really makes the entire song for me. I mean, you get these beautiful, and as Tony Banks describes it, interweaving harmonies coming into the track, creating this dreamy, almost psychedelic kind of feel that really takes you by surprise. And it sounds really orchestral, really symphonic, like a string section coming in. And I think that's what Tony Banks was originally trying to do. He was trying to sample a string section, but it didn't really work out. But something happened, and he ended up getting this sound with all these interweaving melodies, and it was perfect. So it was kind of like a serendipitous discovery. But it really gives the song this really, I don't know, dreamlike, almost hypnotic kind of vibe. So I love that. And then before you know it, we get this really groovy bass line that comes in, and Phil's vocals have this kind of distorted effect to it, giving him this kind of dusky kind of sound. And again, that's the best way I can describe it. And I love it. It's really groovy, but again, really laid back. And Phil sounds extremely soulful on this song as well. So the verses on the track, you just sit back and you just say, it's just such a relaxing moment on the album. And such a feel-good song as well. Like the lyrics, again, talking about things are going to get better. You know, things might be shit now, but they're going to improve. You just wait and see. It's such a powerful kind of message. Again, a lot more meaningful than a lot of the tracks that came before it. Like, what the fuck's a Silver Rainbow? Like, come on, like another job to do, illegal aliens? Like, fuck that shit. This is what Genesis was all about. And it has that magic. It has that emotion to it. And it's really melancholic as well. During the bridge, Phil Collins sounds extremely melancholic to his voice, and I really like that as well. The interweaving harmonies come back in, kind of reprising that intro. Really, those reprises, Genesis was a master of doing that, just throwing that in there. And then at the 3-minute and 30-second mark, we get another strong, really melodic moment where Phil starts singing, "If It's Gonna Get Better." And that's kind of like the feel-good moment of the song, the more poppier vibe. But then he starts singing this falsetto kind of stuff, which is really cool. You don't normally hear Phil Collins singing falsetto. Really nice touch of the song. And then it ends with those interweaving harmonies again. Track's pretty long as well, about 5 minutes, but the amount of stuff that goes into this track definitely justifies the runtime, unlike the other songs on the album, like Legal Alien and Silver Rainbow. This one here actually has the variety to really justify it being 5 minutes or 5.5 minutes, however long it is. Just a wonderful song, and really unique in Genesis's discography. Really soulful, really melodic, and yet funky as well. So, beautiful song. Honestly, some days I feel a 9 out of 10, some days I feel an 8.5. Today I'm feeling a 9 out of 10. I just think the song is absolutely fantastic, and I never get bored of it. Always look forward to hearing this track when I hear the album, and having it at the closer was definitely a smart move by Genesis. So yeah, guys, that closes out the album. Again, another Genesis album in their discography reviewed. It's getting kind of sad because, I'm so close to the end here. 2 more albums to go. Again, if you guys have been watching from the beginning since the Trespass review, I'm not going to be reviewing Calling All Stations just because I just don't feel like talking about it. Maybe I'll make like a mini review of it, maybe like a 5-10 minute thing just to talk about it, but I don't really see the point in that. But yeah, guys, that's Genesis. So really good album. Again, side 1, very, very strong. And side 2, enjoyable, with one huge highlight, that being the track I just talked about. But overall, don't miss out on this album. It's definitely worth a listen. Even if you gave up after Steve Hackett left the band, there's a lot to really latch onto. And really, I feel like this is the natural progression from Duke, whereas Abacab was more of like this out of left field, crazy experimental album. This really is the continuation of Duke. Again, a lot more poppy, but there are some progressive elements. So that's the Genesis self-titled album, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for more videos coming your way. Rock on.